I have been to countless high society parties in my life. They were galas where crystals sparkled like stars, where people laughed but were never truly happy, where compliments were as light as champagne bubbles and faded faster than the prelude of the orchestra. But tonight is different. This is the coronation of Robert, the man I have been with for over 30 years, since he was just a penniless and ambitious young lawyer until he became Mr. Sterling, praised by the press. The guards at the door smiled at me as usual. They didn't need to check for an invitation. I am still Mrs. Sterling, at least on paper and in their minds. I wore a navy blue dress, simple yet perfectly tailored, revealing the collarbones that Robert once called your most charming feature. Back then, I believed him. Now, I know it was just one of many clever phrases to hide the gaps he didn't want me to see. The room was covered in a red carpet, with dazzling crystal lights. I looked around, recognizing many familiar faces: the mayor, a bank director, real estate magnates, and a few figures from the financial industry with whom I had negotiated multi-million-dollar deals alongside Robert. Handshakes, social kisses, and "Are you well?" It all passed by like a ritual. But something was strange. A small, interrupted silence between conversations when I walked past. Their eyes seemed to be judging, pitying, and avoiding me. I heard a few whispers cut short as I approached. I had never experienced this at any other party before. Then I heard it clearly, every single word from behind me. "It's a shame. She has no idea he's about to leave the entire company to Vanessa." My heart stopped. Vanessa, the young assistant, just over 30, with ambitious eyes and a smile that knew its own power. The one I had seen lingering around Robert on every recent business trip. Another voice, colder. "Well, what can you expect? She's no longer young, and she has no children to inherit. The company needs a successor now, doesn't it?" I stood still for a second. In my life, I had heard all kinds of cruel words, but none had ever touched both my marriage and my career at the same time like this. When I turned around, Vanessa was there. A tight red dress, stiletto heels like daggers, and a triumphant gaze. "Hello, Mrs. Sterling," she said, leaning in, her voice sweeter than honey but cold as ice. "I think tonight is a party for strategic partners and shareholders. Perhaps you'll find it uncomfortable here." I smiled. The kind of smile a person who has lived for over 6 decades knows how to use when facing someone who wants to humiliate them. "I am a co-founder of this company. In the early years, I invested more capital than all the shareholders here combined." Vanessa shrugged, the shrug of someone holding a knife hidden beneath silk. "You were, Mrs. Sterling. Now, things have changed. Robert will talk to you later. But for now..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. 2 guards, the same ones who had bowed to me, approached, polite but firm. I didn't resist. A 6'3" woman doesn't need to struggle to prove she's right. I knew my strength lay elsewhere. But as they led me through the crowd, I looked over at Robert, standing less than 10 steps away. He saw everything, and he turned his back. The crystal lights still glittered behind me as the hotel doors closed. No one knew that in that moment, I wasn't just walking out of a party. I was walking out of the facade I had worn for over 30 years. And when a 6'3" woman like me decides she's had enough, no coronation can save the man who betrayed her. The air outside was colder than I expected. The November wind crept into my collar, making me shiver slightly, but not from the cold. When a woman passes 60, she no longer fears the cold. She fears the chill in the eyes of the person who once swore to hold her hand until the end of life. I walked down the marble stairs, the sound of my heels a steady rhythm. At this age, I had learned that a slow and steady pace has its own power. It gives me time to think, to calculate every move. My silver-gray Tesla was parked under the yellow lights of the hotel garage. I got in, closed the door, and let the silence envelop me. In front of me, there were no more glasses of congratulations, no more ballroom music. There was only a quiet darkness, and in that darkness, I began to untie every knot that had bound me for 30 years. The phone in my pocket vibrated continuously, Robert's name flashing like a fake heartbeat. I ignored it. People don't answer the phone when they're starting a war. I opened my contacts and found the name David Chen, my financial advisor for over 20 years. Margaret? What's wrong? Where are you? His voice was full of worry. David, tomorrow when the market opens, I want you to sell all of my shares in Sterling Enterprises. All of them. Don't leave a single penny. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Are you? Are you sure? That stock is worth about 17 million. I know. And I also want you to freeze all of my and Robert's joint accounts. All of them. David sighed heavily. I'll do it, but Robert will go crazy. Let him. I once saved this company through 3 financial crises. Now, he can swim on his own. The call ended. I opened my contacts again. This time it was Linda, the travel agent who had booked all our trips for the past 20 years. Linda, cancel the entire trip next month to Florence. The hotel, the restaurants, the plane tickets, everything. But that's your anniversary trip. There's no US anymore, Linda. Send me the cancellation confirmation by email. I hung up, leaned back in the seat, and closed my eyes. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw everything. The early years spent meticulously signing every office lease, the sleepless nights calculating to pay employee salaries, the checks I signed using my inheritance from my parents, all to build an empire that tonight, under the crystal lights, they said would be handed to a young woman who hadn't lived for even a third of my life. I opened my eyes, picked up my phone, and typed one last message to myself. Tonight begins. And I will take back everything. The car rolled out of the garage. I didn't know what Robert was saying to Vanessa at that moment, but I knew that tomorrow morning they would understand that when a 6'3" woman decides to fight back, no one, not even time, can stop her. I woke up at 5:15 a.m. Not because of sleeplessness at this age, my body was used to waking up early to greet the dawn. But today was different. There were no more mornings of making coffee and waiting for Robert to come down to the dining table. There were no more plans for his meetings with partners. This morning, I woke up to begin dismantling the entire machine I had helped create. The house was eerily silent. There were no footsteps from the gardener outside, no noisy espresso machine. There was only me, in my ash-gray robe, slowly walking into the study, the room Robert had never truly cared about, even though it held the filing cabinets that had been with me for 3 decades. I opened the cabinet. Hundreds of folders were neatly arranged, each one labeled in my handwriting. Company founding 1990. 1. Main office purchase 2003. Morrison Industries Agreement 2006. Each file was a piece of the story that Robert had tried to erase my name from. I started with the first file, the Certificate of Co-Founding and Initial Capital Contribution. My signature was next to his undeniable proof that Sterling Enterprises had 2 founders. I placed it on the table and took a picture of each page with my phone. The next file, the 1994 loan agreement, a $3 million loan that I had secured with my inheritance from my parents. At that time, the company only had 10 employees, a cramped office, and a fragile future. I clearly remembered the night Robert sat in the kitchen, his head in his hands, saying, "If we don't get the money this week, everything will collapse." And I signed. I had gambled my entire future. I continued to open other folders, and then, in the middle of a stack of new papers, I found a draft succession plan. The first page clearly stated, "Proposal to transfer 60% of shares and executive rights to Vanessa Miller within the next 18 months, due to the absence of a legal heir." I sat down, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, not because I was surprised I had guessed as much, but because of the audacity. Robert didn't just betray me emotionally. He intended to completely erase me from the legacy I had built. I took pictures of each page, saving them in a new folder named Keys. When a person has lived for over 60 years and witnessed many dirty tricks in the business world, she knows exactly what is a piece of evidence to take down an opponent, and what is a weapon to be kept secret until the very last second. My phone rang. It was David Chen. "Margaret, Sterling Enterprises stock dropped 3% when the market opened." He definitely knows. "Do you want me to prepare more financial reports for you to take to the board meeting?" Of course. And David, send me a summary of the value of all my personal investments in the company from the day it was founded. I want every number to be clear down to the last penny. I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and looked out at the garden where I had once planted every rose bush. Robert never noticed when they bloomed or when they withered, but I knew. And I knew that, just like those rose bushes, some things only flourish when you take care of them and will die if they are forgotten. Today, I am no longer someone who tends flowers for others. Today, I am the one holding the scissors. I arrived at the Sterling Enterprises building half an hour early. The 38th floor conference room was filled with light from the floor to ceiling windows. The 10-meter-long walnut table had witnessed countless multi-billion-dollar negotiations, and more than a few times, I had sat here but always in a secondary chair, so that Mr. Sterling could be the one named in the press. Today, I sat squarely in the middle of the table, in the chairman's chair. I laid out all the folders on the table, the co-founder registration, the loan agreement, the personal investment summary, and the transfer plan for Vanessa. Each piece of paper was a loaded bullet. The door opened forcefully. Robert walked in, his dark blue suit tidy but his tie askew, his eyes shadowed. Right behind him, Vanessa was in a bright red suit, her face tense beneath perfect makeup. "What kind of game are you playing, Margaret?" Robert dropped his briefcase onto a chair, trying to keep his voice calm, but his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. "Good morning, Robert." And, "Hello, Miss Miller," I replied, my voice as smooth as velvet, but cold enough to cut through the air. "Please, have a seat. We have a lot to discuss." The board members arrived, one by one. James Morrison, the CFO, bowed to me with a look of apprehension. Patricia Webb from the legal department kept glancing at the pile of papers in front of me. The door closed, and the room was filled with a silence as tense as a stretched wire. Robert began. "You have caused a serious crisis. The stock has dropped, clients are calling nonstop. The bank is demanding an explanation because the accounts have been frozen. I want you to immediately reverse your decision to sell the shares." I leaned back in my chair, lacing my fingers across my chest. "I am just exercising my legal right, the right of a co-founder, and the largest investor in the initial phase. The decision is final." Vanessa smirked, interjecting, "Perhaps you don't understand. Sterling Enterprises needs a clear succession plan to maintain stability. We can't let personal feelings destroy the company's future." I smiled and gently slid the paper, titled "Proposed Succession Plan Confidential," to the center of the table. "You're right, Miller. A succession plan is necessary. Something like this, for example. Transfer 60% of shares and full executive rights to a new employee just over 30, simply because she might be able to give the boss what I couldn't because we don't have children." The room went silent. James Morrison cleared his throat, but no one could say anything. Robert's face flushed, and he reached out to grab the paper. I pulled it back immediately. "No need to touch it, Robert. I have it all backed up. And if necessary, the press will be very interested in the real reason for this succession plan." Robert glared at me. "What do you want? Money? Reputation? Revenge?" I stood up, each word like a hammer blow on the table. "What I want is for the truth to be recognized. 32 years of contributions from the very first capital, from the contracts I negotiated when you weren't even strong enough to sit at this table, will not be erased just to legitimize a newcomer. I am not seeking revenge. I am correcting the balance of fairness." I gathered the files and walked towards the door. "The board can save the company, but it cannot save you. You have 24 hours to find $27 million to fill the gap I left, or declare bankruptcy." My hand was just on the doorknob when Robert's voice rang out from behind this time, without any power left. I will resign." I turned back and looked at him. For a moment, I saw the young lawyer from long ago, ambitious but fragile in the face of failure. A wise decision. "And after you sign the divorce papers, I will have my lawyer send a date for asset division. And now," I opened the door and stepped out. "You can clear the chair for someone more deserving." The door closed, leaving a heavy silence in the room, where an empire had just lost the person who built it. 3 days after the board meeting, I signed the divorce papers. My pen moved slowly, each stroke like cutting a cord that had bound me for over 3 decades. For the first time in many years, I signed my name Margaret Hartford, my maiden name, the name my father had once carved on a redwood tree on the porch of our old house. Looking at my signature, I felt as though I had just stepped back into an old suit that fit me with strange perfection. In the following weeks, the large house gradually grew quiet, with Robert's footsteps fading, and then the gardener and housekeeper were gone too. I sold unnecessary items, keeping only what held true value: a few picture frames, an old camera, and the wooden table and chairs I had bought with the bonus from my first contract. I began to rearrange my time. There were no more urgent calls from Robert late at night, no more parties where I had to play the role of the perfect wife. Instead, there were mornings of making coffee, playing classical music, and reading in silence. Then one afternoon, I walked into a small camera shop on an old street. The Leica on the shelf reminded me of my student days when I had dreamed of becoming a photographer before dropping out to help Robert open his law office. I bought it, and at the same time, I enrolled in an advanced photography class. The instructor, Elena, a photographer who had worked for National Geographic, looked at my first photos and said, "You have the eye of someone who has lived long enough to know what is worth documenting." That sentence became a starting point. I began to photograph women who had just gone through major upheavals: divorce, loss, career changes. They laughed, they cried, they stood in front of my lens with eyes that were both fragile and resilient. At the same time, I invested in a sustainable fashion company founded by two young women. They reminded me of myself and Robert in the beginning, but this time, I was the one in control, and no one could erase my name from this story. 3 months later, the small office of Hartford Ventures was born. I hung a wooden sign with gold lettering on the door. We invest in people, not just in ideas. On my first morning sitting at my new desk, I looked out the window and saw the sunlight shining down as if a new season was beginning. I had entered my 64th year with a completely new life, independent, not overshadowed, and not living according to anyone else's schedule, and I knew I had only just begun. The day I walked into the exhibition hall, no one recognized the Mrs. Sterling from the year before. At 64, my hair was grayer, but it was neatly cut, revealing a face that no longer held a trace of worry. A beige linen dress, soft leather flats, and a Leica camera hanging casually on my shoulder. I no longer dressed to please anyone else. I dressed to please myself. Today's exhibition was titled Resilience: Faces of Rebirth, featuring 40 black and white photos of women from 40 to 70 years old, all of whom had gone through a major turning point: divorce, losing a husband, bankruptcy, or illness. Each photo had a story, and all were taken with one condition. If the subject wanted to start over, the Hartford Social Foundation, the social fund I established, would give them a grant to learn a trade, start a business, or simply live long enough to find themselves again. I founded this fund 6 months ago, investing $15 million into it, the amount of money that one day, if I had children, I would have left for them. But I didn't have children. Instead, I left a path for other women. In the middle of the exhibition hall, I saw Robert. He had aged noticeably, the aura of the previous year was gone, leaving only eyes that had lost their confidence. He walked over, stopping slightly when he stood in front of me. "Margaret, you look happy." I nodded slightly. "I am happy, Robert, and busy. The social fund has helped 42 women stabilize their lives this year. The investment company is supporting 3 startup projects. Oh, and next week, I'm going to Kenya to take photos for a girls' education project." He pursed his lips, his eyes a mix of regret and self-doubt. I'm sorry. I know it's too late. I don't need an apology. I needed my life, and now I have it." I walked past him without looking back. The glass doors opened, welcoming me into the golden afternoon sunlight of autumn. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, looking at the city lights. My phone chimed with a message. "Congratulations on the exhibition. You deserve everything. V." I deleted it immediately, without needing to reread it. Some chapters should be closed completely, with no gaps. In the living room, my suitcase was ready for the trip to Kenya. On the table was a list of 12 women who would receive new scholarships from the fund next month. I know I will never have biological children, but somewhere out there, dozens, hundreds of lives will bear the mark of my hand, and that is a different kind of legacy, more enduring than any company. Tomorrow, I will pick up my camera again, and I will capture images to tell their stories. And when the Kenyan sea waves lap at my feet, I will remember I left a party to step into a wider world, and I have never regretted it.